Hey everyone, welcome to another AP Environmental Science lecture. In this short time we're going to spend together, we're going to look at two things that should sound familiar, have you take in a intro chemistry or intro biology course. First thing we're going to look at is the chemical reactions and the conservation of matter, and then we're going to go over to biological molecules. Again, things you probably have heard before. But the goal of this lecture is to see that these chemical and biological reactions, they interact in most environmental systems, and we're going to see how their interaction not only helps us survive in the world we live in, but also can have some detrimental effects as well. So let's get started. All right, we're going to start off with chemical reactions and conservation of matter. Again, probably a review from your chemistry classes. So when we look at a chemical reaction, we're just going from atoms from one molecule separate from another, but they're going to or they can recombine. The key point here is that these atoms are never destroyed or never created, almost like your laws of thermodynamics. Energy is not created, nor is it destroyed as well. Only things that may happen are the bonds that may change. So for example, here we have burning methane and the chemical reaction for the burning of methane. You have this combination of methane and oxygen, and when we burn it, you can see that the hydrogen atoms, they're still there. They weren't destroyed. They just recombined to form other molecules. At the left-hand side of the equation, it was methane. We added oxygen and we ignited it, and now we have water. So again, same number of atoms, hydrogen atoms, just in a different form. And it's important to note that they can occur in any direction. If we take, for example, a combustion engine of a car, notice that the combustion of fuel, you have these nitrogen atoms combining with oxygen atoms to form nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide is a harmful air pollutant. So if you notice, the equation from your chemistry class, I'm sure you've taken before, this equation can go both ways. And reiterating again, there are still the same number of nitrogen and oxygen atoms. Again, they've just recombined and changed form. This brings us to the law of conservation of matter, the fact that no atoms can be created or destroyed. So if we look at burning paper, for example, or if we make it a little step further, let's look at a forest fire. The trees, as this fire ravages through the forest, the trees seem to diminish, or some will vanish, or they'll burn and it'll just be ash. But what's actually happening, if we look at the equation, the carbon and hydrogen make up the tree are combining with the oxygen in the air. And as a result, they're producing this CO2, they're producing water, and they're producing other materials. And the key point of this, again, is no atom, all the same atoms, the original atoms still exist, they're just changing form. And this makes it extremely difficult if something is hazardous, it typically remains hazardous. We'll look at a few examples throughout the year, but a simple example is batteries. Once batteries are finished, it's the remote control of your TV is not working. We usually just toss them into the garbage. But going with that theme that once hazardous, always hazardous, an example like batteries, those metals will never disappear. They'll end up in a landfill. Over time, the outer layer will corrode, and then those metals will turn up elsewhere. And usually, in this case of batteries, they'll end up in the water system. And we've seen this quite recently in regards to flint. This didn't have anything to do with batteries, but it had to do with corrosive pipes. You can look it up. Basically, long story short, the city was trying to save money on giving their residents water, so they opted for older pipes. Those pipes are made of lead, and over time they corrode. And as a result, there was lead in the water of these residents. And we all know that lead is an extremely harmful metal when it's inside our human bodies, and especially for young children. So flint was seen quite a few cases of children coming in, especially if you look at just the brain. Lowered IQ, ADHD, hearing loss. These are all things that, you imagine a child learning in school, and they're being harmed just from the water they drink. So again, once it's hazardous, it usually remains hazardous. Moving on to biological molecules in cells now. Again, these words will all be familiar to you from your biology class, but they're very important when we look at environmental systems. Before we get into those, there's two types. There's first the inorganic. And these are not going to contain carbon, no carbon at all. If they do contain carbon, notice here's an example of some inorganic compounds. Carbon dioxide is considered inorganic because it is not bound to hydrogen. Okay, so make sure you understand that. So they can contain carbon only if it's not bound to hydrogen. And that brings us to the organic molecules, and we'll see that these are going to have a carbon-to-carbon bond, or they're going to have a carbon-to-hydrogen bond. So again, we have our carbon, but notice in an inorganic, there always hydrogen isn't involved. And it's these organic molecules that are the basis to life, these that give us, which we'll see at the end of this lecture, cells. So here's the famous carbon compounds you've all heard of and know about, I'm sure. We're going to hit on each one very quickly. First one we're going to look at is carbohydrates. We all love our carbs. Perfect examples, bread. And these are just mostly sugars. And you can start out with glucose, which is a simple sugar. It's a monosaccharide. And it's easily used by plants and animals for quick energy. If you want some quick energy, you got your glucose. Maybe you've had a goo gel. When you maybe see marathon runners eat those. Quick energy, you get it right away. The other interesting about these sugars, though, is that they can link together to form long chains like polysaccharides and things of that nature. So carbohydrates are essential for all living things. And I know what you're thinking. No, butter is not a carb. Butter is actually a lipid or a fat. And we all know about these. We're assuming horrible food, not good for us, fried food. But lipids, and there are some good lipids and fats as well. So the important things about these, and we see these in our wax, again, fats, you see them in oils. Think back to water. These are not attracted to water. Think oil and water, how they separate. So these are nonpolar molecules. And what these do, though, is these form a major part of the membrane around cells that are essential. Moving on. There you go. You have your oil and water mixing. They're nonpolar covalent, so they're just going to reject each other. Moving on to our proteins. So these play a huge role. It's just long chains of nitrogen-containing molecules. You start with amino acids. A group of amino acids we call a peptide. A group of peptides is a protein. Very, very important for several reasons, though. Proteins will provide structural support. Proteins will allow us for energy storage. They allow for internal transport, and they even provide defense against foreign substances. So antibodies are an example of proteins. And as you may remember, they also are enzymes that will speed up chemical reactions in our bodies and in nature. Moving on to our nucleic acids. The DNA, we all know, is essential for genetic material passed from one offspring to another. But our nucleic acids, and again, you remember these, it's the AUGC. And remember, DNA does not have uracil, it has thymine. So those are your 5 nucleic acids. And with the RNA, remember, those are just for the synthesis or production of proteins. So we take all these together. We have our carbs, we have our lipids, we have these nucleic acids and proteins and things, and what they're making, and they are giving us our cells. That's why we're here. The very basic of life. It is highly organized. We can go from a single bacteria, like your prokaryotic bacteria cell, or you can go to something like a shrimp or your dog at home, or even you, this multicellular organism that just exists through this crazy dance of the carbs and lipids and gives us life as we know it on Earth. So through the years, we'll be examining these bioreactions along with the chemical reactions and their effects on the environment. And it's essential to know this because it's going to occur at the cellular level or the organismal level as well. So make sure you understand those. As always, if you need anything, check out the website. There's lots of resources on there, and you can always rewatch this.